Welcome to the latest episode of Detoxicity. If you are a regular listener of this podcast, thank you for listening. If you are a new listener to the podcast, thank you for listening. Welcome. My name is Mike Joseph. I am the host. I am the creator. I am the producer. I am the custodian. This is my baby. We've been running since the beginning of 2020. And this is sort of my little experiment to talk about masculinity with other people who want to talk about masculinity and see where the conversations lead. Some of them are light, some of them are heavy. Most of them are light and heavy in various spots. Regardless of where you're coming from, I really hope that you listen to this podcast and understand that it is made with love. It is made with the intent to explore from a place of curiosity, from a place of personal growth, from a place of betterment for all of us, not just men. Like this podcast is made by men, the guests are men, but really most of the things that are talked about here are applicable to anybody regardless of gender. So thank you for listening. If you want to know more about me, I am on Instagram at DetoxPod Guy. You can also go to bit.ly/DetoxPod Plus to find my Patreon. If you subscribe to my Patreon, you get episodes a little bit early. I'm still trying to figure out whether there's extra content that I might roll out at some point. We'll see. At any rate, thank you for listening. And we're going to jump into this episode with my friend Greg Harrell. Greg is... what do I say about Greg? So here's the cool thing, right? The internet is this vast place, and there's so much bad in the internet. There's so much bad in social media right now. I really do think that social media and the internet has almost like ruined civilization in some ways, which is a harsh thing to say and a big thing to say. But I do think that there are elements of this virtual digital world that we live in that are bad, and their qualities that we can never get back. And I'm not going to talk about that when it comes to Greg, because Greg and I met through the internet, and we met through the internet more than 2 decades ago, back when I think people were approaching the internet from a less financially motivated, less cynical, more like, hey, here's all this information, and here are all these people, and isn't this cool type of standpoint. Greg and I met through the consumer reviews website Opinions, RIP that site. It was a place where we both wrote music and movie reviews, along with several other people who have been on the show in the past. I've had some very long-lasting friendships that were initially cultivated through that. And one interesting thing about my and Greg's friendship is that while it has been consistent over the past 20 plus years, we've never really fallen out of touch for a significant period of time. We've also never met in person, which I think is going to change maybe by the time you listen to this episode. And this conversation that we did for the podcast represents the longest continuous conversation he and I have had verbally in the 2 decades we've known each other. We communicate a bunch via email. We communicate via text. We've just not had a lot of like voice-to-voice conversations. And again, we've never met actually like in person as three-dimensional human beings. So this is a really cool reminder of the good that can exist via the internet and sort of proto-social media. But Greg's a wonderful guy. He lives in the Midwest. He's a corporate stooge, as you will hear him say. He's a very talented writer, and I've thought that for the entire time that I've known him. And we talk about a few things. I think most pertinent to this podcast, it's writing as therapy. It's kind of owning your black sheepness. And I think that relates to not only his sort of family situation, but also just his peer group situation, and just marching to the beat of your own drummer and being cool with that. So, Greg Harrell, thank you for coming on the show. I will leave the floor to you.
Okay. I'm always kind of bad at giving an elevator pitch for myself, but I'd say I'm a couple of different things. I'd say I'm a writer first and foremost. It's never been my source of income, but it's the thing I've been doing the longest in my life. And it's the thing that I feel like it gives my life the most purpose. I'd say poetry and fiction have been the focuses the last couple of years, but I've dabbled in a little bit of everything over the years. I mean, we met through music reviewing way back in the day. So there's that. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a nerd of varying persuasions. Again, music probably being the big one that we share. And I'm a corporate idiot, which, yes, is literally my job title at this point.
Is that what your business? They don't have business cards anymore. Is that what your
Oh,
LinkedIn
100,
says?
100%. That is what I've got on my Patrick Bateman business card.
Too funny. So for me, the thing that literally sticks out the most when I think about you is that I've known you since you were a teenager,
Yes, you have actually.
which is kind of insane considering you are very much now not a teenager.
Yes, I'm an old
And
man now.
yes, yeah. We met through Opinions, which is
Mhm.
how I've met quite a few of my good friends. And this is going back now, I want to say like probably 22, 23 years, somewhere around there,
That's crazy to think
which
about,
is,
isn't it?
yeah, it's pretty insane. So I feel like I've kind of watched you grow up, although we've never met in person, although I think
This,
that may change soon,
yeah, this might actually be the first face-to-face conversation we've had.
which is just like a nutty thing when you think about it. And I guess maybe if you grew up with the internet, it's kind of like a different thing. Like you have friends, online friends that you've never met in person. I think younger people might have a lot more of that than we do. But, you know, we grew up in sort of a pre internet world, like the early days of social media. So for us to have like a consistent cadence of communication over, 22, 23 years and really be having our first face to face conversation now is pretty wild.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you said over email that we met back when the internet was still good.
Yeah, we totally did.
It's like, I mean, like centralized as internet communications are now, I do kind of miss that Wild West era where you would just have all these different communities, kind of all these different just way stations set up in the grand Wild West that was the internet at that time. And you just have all these kind of communities just kind of find each other naturally.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
it felt very natural.
that's honestly like maybe it was like this for you a little bit too, but opinions for me was just so foundational, especially being, a teenager at the time I started posting my first reviews because it was just such a diverse and eclectic community of music listeners. And it exposed me to so much. Like it exposed me to things that I honestly don't think I would have encountered just through Pitchfork or Rolling Stone or any of the other music journalist tastemakers. I found Scandinavian rock bands through opinions that are still like on my short list of favorite bands. It's kind of to the point that like when that community just kind of, I don't know if I'd say it imploded, but it just kind of, everybody just kind of slowly drifted away as, as internet communities do.
Yeah,
That it kind of almost felt like a little bit of a Paradise Lost thing because, I think I kind of joined like right as things were kind of, plateauing and kind of starting to trail off. And I feel like I kind of spent years after just trying to find like the next thing like that. And I honestly don't think I ever really did.
the internet changed the way that, I think the gamifying and monetization of community really kind of took hold as opinions were sort of trailing off and as you joined and you kind of caught like I always hate sounding like the old man, like lecturing from the pulpit. But I should just embrace it because that's what I am. But just that it was lightning in a bottle, and it kind of doesn't exist anymore. And I love hearing that. The exposure and the community is what sticks out most from that experience for you because you grew up. Did you grow up in Minnesota or
No, I've actually lived in the Chicagoland area for pretty much my entire life. I
okay?
only lived in Minnesota for about 3 years while my ex was in grad school.
I lost the timeline.
It's all
So
good.
yeah, so you grew up still in like a city, then like a pretty. reasonably diverse environment?
So the Chicagoland suburbs are pretty different from Chicago proper, and I've lived in both. I'm actually in the suburbs now, even though I think my heart is still kind of in the city proper. But like, I don't know, it's a little bit strange because I don't think I got like as much culture as I would have gotten if I had been born and raised in the city. But at the same time, like I grew up with a public school education, and Chicago public schools are kind of infamously like not great, let's say. But like not only did I get a good education, but like the suburbs were fairly diverse. So I got like so I grew up with like a lot of different kinds of people, like, because I feel like there are people who like just kind of grow up in the suburbs and they never encounter people of color until they make it to college. Like, that wasn't me. Like, I grew up with a lot of different kinds of people around me and a lot of different friends.
Nice. And because writing is so important to you, when did that become something that you put in your head as something you were good at and wanted to pursue?
I wanted to pursue writing long before I was actually any good at it.
It's all
So
relative.
So I've been writing in some form since like literally I was a kid. Like I'd probably say like third or fourth grade was when I started. And horror was actually my gateway to writing. Cause among my many, nerd hats, horror is one of them. I've always loved it. And growing up, like watching like, just watching like the network TV safe versions of like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and, the classic 80s slasher fare. At some point I got it in my head, I want to try doing something like that. So I just wrote these absolutely dog shit stories that were just like shameless ripoffs of Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. There was some Tales from the Crypt in there too, because Tales from the Crypt back in the day used to play like immediately after Mad TV on Fox, which is a kind of a crazy back-to-back lineup in hindsight.
Yeah,
But I think that
who's put that together?
I don't know, but I think that back-to-back lineup kind of explains a lot of the adult that I grew into and became. So I just kind of used to write these like short stories, kind of try to share them with my friends who would sometimes humor me and sometimes just tell me straight up that this is complete garbage. But for one reason or another, I just kept at it. Around high school, I ended up transitioning from horror to doing more comedy. Comedy kind of inspired by like a lot of early 2000s internet humor, like Something Awful, Maddox, things like that. Things that were both kind of weird and kind of crass and edgy. And somehow I followed that line into poetry and fiction writing in college. And I think that's where I started to get more serious and really started, improving my craft and taking it seriously as a discipline.
I mean, I'm thinking back to when I first met you, and the thing about you, and I think a lot of the writers on Opinions that were on the younger side, is that you all were writing in a way that I thought was like advanced for your age.
Hmm. That's interesting because I never really thought that about myself, but I did think that about like a lot of the younger writers on Opinions, because they were like, there were dudes on that site who were literally high school age that were
Hmm.
still publishing like things that I thought at least were, like worthy of publication, or at least at the level of like what rock critics were doing at that time, especially since everything on Opinions, like, I mean, there was shorter and bite-sized stuff, but I feel like Opinions kind of leaned more towards like essay length stuff.
Yeah, long
And the
form.
fact that, yeah, exactly, long form stuff. And the fact that like so many young people were just able to like basically take that assignment and run with it, I always thought was a super cool thing.
I don't think that could happen nowadays. I think everybody's ADHD is so crazy.
No, TikTok has ruined the youths. Nobody has the attention span for long form writing anymore.
Seriously. In your intro, you called yourself a corporate idiot. And I'm wondering, assuming your life as a corporate idiot is similar to my life as a corporate idiot, and anyone else who's a corporate idiot's life is a corporate idiot, where do you find the time to indulge in writing at all?
Well, it kind of depends. A lot of writers have a very consistent and very disciplined writing practice. They kind of say, I'm going to write from 6 to 8 every morning. Um, that has never been me. It's just like something that's never really interested me. I'd say that I tend to write usually during the after work hours. And Don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna say that I do it every day. There's times where I'm just kind of too bled out and spent, at the end of a workday to do it. But still, like, there's actually been times where even during my busiest seasons, like, writing has kind of given me almost like a safe space to retreat to at the end of the day, where I'm kind of feeling bled out and spent, and I kind of need a good place to go to or a good place to escape the grind. It's been kind of the place that I, retreat to. And I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm the rare kind of writer because I feel like it's just sort of a conventional wisdom about writing that nobody really likes writing. It's just kind of a miserable fucking chore, and
I
even the
mean,
published ones have to force themselves to do it. I'm kind of a weirdo in that I genuinely enjoy
enjoy
doing
it.
it. Yes. I don't need to force myself to do it. Like, I'm capable of doing it without having a deadline set or without having to think of an audience. I mean, even though I identify as a writer first and foremost, I mean, I'm still somebody that's mostly like, been featured on websites or like smaller presses. But the fact of the matter is, it's just something I love doing. And it's something that when I have the capacity to do it, I do it.
I hearing even that level of discipline is a little, I don't know if it's odd or interesting or makes me envious in some ways. I'm good at catching a groove for like a couple days and then
Mm,
the bottom kind of drops out.
yes,
And, not to harp on opinions, but one thing I loved about that and the way that I wrote back then is that I really disciplined myself to write every day or every other day.
for sure.
I'm pissing out 500 words, 1,000 words a day. And it's more difficult to put myself in the mindset to do that now. I think once I'm like on the keyboard and I'm typing, I kind of hit a flow state and I'm like, okay, we're moving and grooving. But getting to the point where I'm like, all right, Mike, sit at the computer, or even rarer, like open up a notebook with a pen and like write stuff to get to that point is so difficult when there's distractions everywhere.
I think for me, it also kind of depends on the type of writing that I'm doing. Because something that I realized kind of near the end of the opinions days, and I imagine you might have noticed this yourself in my writing, is that I kind of got a little bit bored with the conventions of music reviewing. Um, during the end, I kind of did like a lot of Lester Bang's new journalist shit, stuff that was honestly probably more pretentious and a little more heady than I really got away with doing. Uh,
You were
you
challenging
know,
yourself.
yes, exactly. Read a little too much Paul Lawrence and thought, yeah, I can do this. But like when it comes to fiction, and I think particularly when it comes to poetry, it can sometimes give me like kind of a much needed outlet for some shit that's been weighing on me over the course of a day that I now kind of need to get off my chest. Poetry for me especially it's like almost therapy as much as it is creative expression. It's kind of getting like not just the bad shit, but also the bad shit is a pretty big part of it.
Sure.
Just out there and articulated in some way. And it kind of feels a little bit less heavy after articulating it and getting it on the page somehow.
I love that. And that's, I would imagine, assume, hope that that is what writing does for a lot of people.
Mhm.
If whatever, everybody's motive is different, but I would imagine that most people who get into any sort of artistic pursuit do so because there's an element of, you know, there's a therapy that's involved in that, whether it's, singing or writing or acting or whatever it is.
No, 100%. And I think poetry, especially, has kind of developed a reputation for being just like theatrical trauma dumping, which it's not. There's more to it than that. But there is a little bit of that component to it as well. I'm not going to say that that's entirely untrue.
Sure. I would have to imagine that you're unique to your upbringing as a poet, if that makes sense at all. Like, I mean, I don't roll with a lot of dudes. I didn't roll with a lot of dudes growing up who wrote poems, right?
Mhm.
And I'm assuming that was the case for you. Writing in general, I think, was just not something a lot of people in my circles or as a younger person or my family did. Did you ever catch shit for that?
Honestly, not really, no. I have kind of an odd relationship with my family where I've kind of always seen myself as being the black sheep of a very tight knit and connected family, just because I'm kind of the only one in my family who, for lack of better phrasing, is into weird shit. Because, like, it kind of feels like, I think your podcast kind of exists to counteract this narrative, but it feels like there's this, like, script that everybody's life is supposed to follow to a T to some extent. And a lot of the people in my family have followed that, script to some extent. My dad was like one of 8 siblings. I grew up with a shit ton of cousins, and pretty much all of them just kind of did the thing where they went to school, got jobs, got married, started families. I'm pretty much the only one in the family who spent, their young years watching weird Japanese movies and alternative comedy and writing, and had this crazy idea that I was going to make it as a writer or pursue writing. And, it kind of still seems to be the hill that I'm dying on, where I kind of don't really have any interest in kind of keeping the bloodline going. Not to say that I wouldn't like to have somebody to share my life with, but I've kind of been going it alone for a pretty good while now. I don't really have any interest in having kids, but like, at the same time, I've been kind of lucky enough that nobody in my family has really given me shit about it. There hasn't really been any judgment. Everybody's been, for the most part, encouraging of what I do. There's never really even been any like passive aggression or, well, I guess we won't be having grandkids this year or
Right,
shit like that.
right.
So I don't know. I guess I've kind of gotten lucky there.
Yeah, it does sound like you've gotten lucky because I feel like and like I really just have my experience to draw on here. And if you don't follow the narrative, either you get straight up like, "Hey, what's wrong with you?"
Mhm.
or you get little digs. You get the little, like you said, passive aggressive kind of people trying to like make comments without actually making coming straight out and making the comment. And as this podcast preaches, it's like, you can have people in your life and have regular people in your life without subscribing to the, quote unquote normal narrative of, you know, graduating school, getting a job, getting married, having kids, like that whole thing. So and it sounds like actually I'm going to rewind that back a little bit. Was there ever like a conscious decision on your part to not be part of that narrative? Or were you just like, I'm being Greg?
That's a very good question. I don't know, because like I'd say it was just kind of me just sort of just kind of like committing to what I was interested in, kind of more than it was me trying to self-consciously be different. Like I'll say this, something that I've noticed about myself, especially the more that I've aged, is that there is some part of me that just kind of like instinctively likes to go against the grain and has a little bit of contrarian in him. I don't know if you know the song Throw It on the Ground by Lonely Island, but
I don't.
I adore that song because not only is it very funny, but I kind of see a little bit of the worst parts of myself in that song too. Um, because growing up, like, I kind of don't know the exact moment that I kind of started to go off script. I'd say it was maybe, actually, you know what? I think I can kind of like point at fourth or fifth grade as kind of being the moment where it started to happen, because that was the moment where I kind of started to notice the sort of the beginnings of the depression setting in. Um, and I'm not going to say that like, well, that's the reason I'm into weird shits, but it kind of felt like I was starting to deal with something that I didn't really see like a lot of the other people my age dealing with, or if they were, like nobody ever really talked about it. And honestly, at that time, I don't think I would have even had the vocabulary or the ability to articulate what I was feeling. So I don't know. That kind of might have been the moment that I started moving against the grain a little bit.
Were you able to recognize it then as something different? I mean, I can't imagine maybe in 2026, you can picture like a 9-year-old being like, oh, I'm depressed. But, you know, 25, 30 years ago, I don't know that many elementary school age people had the vocabulary to even articulate what depression was.
Not only did I not recognize it at that time, I didn't fucking start to recognize it until I was probably in my early 20s.
Okay.
Such is the power of repression. of just being like, I don't know what this is, but maybe if I just ignore it and push it down, it'll just kind of go away on its own. I
How'd
think
that
it's,
work out for you?
oh, it worked out incredibly well. Perfect. Great childhood. No issues. Fit in perfectly. No social issues. Honestly, like at the time that we met and started talking, I think I was starting to undergo a major turning point in my life in a lot of different ways because, hey, not only did I start to realize, okay, this isn't just something I can push away and pretend isn't there. This is an issue and it kind of needs to be treated and acknowledged. But I also looked back on a lot of my life to that point, and particularly a lot of friendships I had growing up, because I maintained a couple of childhood friendships kind of going, through high school and my adolescent years, as everybody does. But at some point I started to realize that as those friends grew and aged, we were kind of going on different life paths, and particularly they kind of believed in a lot of toxic shit that I just didn't believe myself and that I didn't want to keep in my life anymore. So I just sort of basically just made some hard social cuts. Like I basically just cut some folks out of my life altogether and decided that I kind of want to start anew. Like I don't just want to be putting my head in the sand and pretending this is an issue. I don't kind of want to grow up and be a fuckhead like all these other people that I grew up with. Like I want to start working towards some kind of change. And that's kind of where I met you. I met some friends in college that I would probably say were like maybe the first positive social connections I'd had. I'm not going to say in my entire life, but at least I'd say they were probably like the first real meaningful friendships that I had made. So again, to answer your question of how did that go for me, very badly. And it left me a lot of work to do it left me a lot of work to do for, at least like, I'd say the work is still ongoing, but particularly during my early to mid 20s, it left me with a lot to do and a lot to catch up on.
I'm wondering what you viewed as the toxicity that you experienced. I think that's the first time I've actually used a variant of this podcast name in 210 episodes.
Crazy.
During a conversation, because age wise we're a few years apart in terms of where we grew up. That's different. So I would imagine the stuff I experienced from my social group that I later recognized as being toxic is different from the stuff maybe that you experienced. And I'm just curious what you identified either internally or externally is like, nah, I don't really want that.
Boy. Well,
also because I have this sort of ignorant idea in my head of what the average like Midwestern. I mean, it's not ignorant because I lived in the Midwest for 3 years as an adolescent, but I'm curious, I guess, what it is that you went through or what you identified as not wanting to be.
So despite living in Chicagoland my entire life, I grew up with a pretty good amount of conservatism, both family and within my social networks. And particularly kind of the further I got into high school, the more I kind of started to notice the uglier sides of it. And it's funny because like for a very long time, I just kind of drank the Kool-Aid and ran with it just because that was kind of the only thing I knew. There were a few things that made me start to kind of question and second guess it. One is the fact that I'd say at least since the mid 90s, I was into punk rock. Rancid and Green Day were kind of my gateway drugs, but I ended up taking it further into a lot of the, kind of mostly the SoCal stuff, Bad Religion, Black Flag, all the fun stuff. And I won't say it immediately cracked that facade and made me realize, oh, well, this is actually bullshit. But I think it at least kind of, started to sow some seeds because I grew up with a lot of conservatives who listened to the same bands and they just never really, started to second guess the Fox News Kool-Aid. But the other thing that I think kind of broke me away from that was kind of the years immediately following 9/11, particularly like it's kind of weird to think about because I was a fuckhead high schooler who didn't really know much of anything. But as soon as like the war in Iraq happened, something in me just clicked and I was just like, this is stupid bullshit. None of this makes any fucking sense. Why is this happening?
Right.
So I'd say those two things were kind of like what made me start to push away from that. And the other thing was I heard my friends just say some straight up bigoted hate-filled shit that, I mentioned that I grew up in a fairly diverse community. One of the crazy things about the Chicagoland suburbs, at least from my perspective and my time growing up there, is that you can't really escape diversity. Like, you're going to have like diversity in your life. You're most likely going to have at least one, a couple of good black friends growing up. And these guys were the same, but I would hear them just say some like out and out stupid fucking racist shit. Like, I will say this, like, Fox News and, the at least mainstream conservative media likes to say, no, 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 this isn't bigoted. We're just kind of, saying, we're just, we're espousing common sense. We're espousing, fair and balanced commentary. I know how their shit is interpreted versus, what they're actually saying. I know that very well firsthand. And the more I saw that and the more I got exposed to it, the more I was just like, nope. And in addition to that, a lot of them were just kind of shitty friends. I got kind of like, there was definitely a pecking order in my friend group, and somehow I kind of ended up at the kind of bottom to mid tier of the friend group. Like, there was kind of this daily ritual that got established, I think, during my senior year of high school, where a bunch of people would just run up and slap me on the back of the head as
Oh,
hard as they
jeez.
possibly could. So, in short, kind of the totality of all that.
Good
It was a,
God.
if it wasn't one thing that clued me in that these people kind of suck, it was kind of everything, just an avalanche of garbage that all
Good.
kind of added up.
That was not my high school experience, thank goodness. And I shouldn't be surprised that it was other people's high school experience, because that's probably the rule rather than the exception.
Mhm.
It still sucks that it happens. And I also think kind of the pecking order just sort of speaks to the mentality that I think some people never grow out of.
Yes.
But the ability to not be a good friend, which it is and it isn't gender specific. I'm trying to figure out how to like word this. Women are generally taught how to relationship better than men are.
It's funny that you say that, because for most of my life, I've always socially gotten along with women better than men, just because it's kind of a little bit of everything. Growing up, I spent a lot more time with my mom than my dad. Um, When I look back on my high school years, the best friend that I think I had from that time wasn't the guy that I actually thought was my best friend. It was his younger sister.
Hmm.
Because even though there was like a 4-year age difference between us, she was kind of a very mature and old soul, and I felt like I could kind of be open and honest with her in a way that I really couldn't with a lot of the guy friends I had from that time. The first really good friend I made in college was also a lady. Actually, the lady who was dating my roommate my sophomore year of college. She just kind of walked over me during one of her weed and Robitussin trips and
Whoa.
started talking to me. Yeah, they were into they did some partying. But despite that, she was a really good person and very easy to talk to, and somebody I just felt like I can talk to about really any fucking thing without judgment. And I kind of like look back at her as being, we don't talk as often as I kind of wish we did still, but she was probably the best friend that I had at that time in my life. And honestly, she did a lot to kind of like step me on the right path from the shit that I kind of inherited as a kid.
And I guess to bring things into the present, understanding what you experienced as a younger person, understanding depression, in a different way now. What does managing that look like for Greg in 2026?
Probably not managing it as well as I should be. I haven't been
Sure,
in
plenty of
therapy
us
for,
can say that.
yeah. I haven't been in therapy for a minute. I'm 100% a pro therapy person. In all likelihood, should have somebody that I see at least bi-weekly to get some shit off my chest, just because poetry can't do everything.
That is true.
It's just been kind of hard to like find the time to like slot it. Like, that's kind of one thing that I have kind of struggled to find a way to sort of slot into my, weekday schedule. But beyond that, I'd say writing does help. I don't think creativity should kind of be, the beginning and end of therapy for anyone, but it does 100% help. I'd say kind of having people that I can talk to about just, the dark shit going on in my head also makes a huge difference. And also kind of knowing, okay, it's not just me feeling this. Lots of other people are kind of struggling with the same thing. We're all kind of in it together. And I'd also say just kind of trying to be generous to myself, which is something that I 100% struggled with when I was younger. I mean, I used to have a lot of self-loathing issues back in the day, and I still self-deprecate from time to time, but at the time I kind of self-deprecated just because I thought I was kind of a piece of shit and I didn't think, anybody would ever like or love me. So this just kind of felt like I was kind of, just trying to, I don't know what I was going to say was meet people kind of at the same level, but that really isn't right. I don't know. I don't entirely know what I'm trying to articulate with that. I just,
That's
I,
fine.
I just, I just thought I sucked back in the day, and I might as well just fess up to it and run with it. Where I think I've gotten better about that, and I'm a little more kinder to myself, so that helps too.
And it's good to, as someone who has been on a similar journey and is also, been a fly on the wall for your journey, like I can
Mm.
see the progress,
And something else I've realized too is that it's a never-ending battle.
damn real.
Because in my younger days, okay, in my younger days when I started doing weekly therapy sessions, and I was also on Wellbutrin for a couple of years too.
Very familiar.
Yes. And when I started Wellbutrin, I underwent a lot of what I called Wellbutrin epiphanies, where I realized a lot of things about myself. The biggest thing I realized about myself on Wellbutrin that I didn't know before was that I had massive social anxiety, and it
Hmm.
kind of informed a lot of how I interacted and engaged with people. I don't know how I had no reference point whatsoever for this until I started Wellbutrin, but I think the Wellbutrin kind of helped like calm it down and kind of corral it to the point that I didn't really feel it as much as I did. I think before it was just kind of this paralyzing thing that I just sort of assumed was normal and was just a thing how everyone felt communicating. And after Wellbutrin, it was like, okay, no, I guess that really wasn't normal at all. And that was just sort of yet another toxic thing that I lived with for way longer than I probably should have. But there came a moment, it was kind of like around the time that I finished college, where I think I developed a little bit of hubris. And I was like, all right, 2 years of therapy, 2 years of Wellbutrin, I've done it. I've figured it out.
I
I've got all
won.
my, I've won. I've got all my demons reined in. This shit doesn't have to define me anymore. And then, like a year or so later, the Fantods came back, stronger than ever, and I was just sort of like, shit, it doesn't go away. Even if, you do find some way to corral your demons or acknowledge them or, get them temporarily squared away, they come back
They come
stronger
back.
than
Yeah.
ever. How
Yeah.
the fuck does that work?
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
fair.
It's, it's not. But I think that, acknowledgement is a step. And then, sort of the work progresses from there. Like the worst thing you can do is not acknowledge and not address,
Mhm.
because that's when the demons are going to kind of run roughshod over you and you're not really going to know what they're doing.
Yes.
It's like, knowing the devil and being able to speak to the devil in maybe like a rational kind of way is better than just acting like the devil ain't there.
I'd say that's the big thing that distinguishes present day me from the me of my early 20s is that I know how the devil works, and I at least have some tools and resources in a network to combat it.
I love that.
That's not to say that there haven't been times where those tools and resources in that network haven't been, tested. COVID particularly did a
Woo!
lot to kind of really test all those things.
I mean, it fucked everybody up. So,
Well, not to really say my COVID was worse than your COVID or anybody's COVID. It's really like something I've realized about the pandemic here is that everybody has their own war stories.
hmm
But like my pandemic experience was I'd just ended things with my ex, like literally a few months before the pandemic started. And I was moving from Minneapolis back to the Chicago area. And I was doing, and one of the reasons why I stuck around the Twin Cities a little bit longer than our breakup was that I was hoping to negotiate a job transfer, which, once lockdown happened and my company went into crisis mode, all that shit just got flatlined. So I came back to Chicago kind of heartbroken, without a job, really without any kind of a plan in place, while the world is literally just fucking falling apart everywhere. So I'm just feeling like absolute and total shit. And like, my friends, like I said, everybody has their own war stories from 2020. But a lot of my friends, still had jobs or they still had partners. And it kind of felt like there was a little bit of a disconnect there. Like, there was definitely like, when I look back on that time, lots of people gave me advice that I think was kind of like them thinking they were helping me, but it kind of just felt like them giving me kind of horseshit advice since they couldn't really like, especially when it came to the job search, there was like a lot of, well, have you tried this? And I'm like, yes, I did try this. Unless you have been in the position where you've had to look for a job in the middle of a pandemic when nobody's hiring, kindly fuck off.
Right. I mean, that's rough, man, because you're dealing with a triple whammy situation where it's like,
yes,
global pandemic, no job, or lost your job, lost your partner, actually quadruple whammy, relocating. And one thing that I think about a lot is how people will say absolutely messed up shit with good intentions.
Yes, 100%. And that to me kind of tested like a lot of that protective network that I've built up for myself over the years. Cause like when I look back on 2020, up until that point, I kind of felt like there were like certain safeguards that I'd built for myself that kind of seemed like impenetrable. And those safeguards just got like beaten to a pulp. And some of them I think just got like broken permanently. And it took me probably like I'd say it took me at least a good year to kind of get back on my feet again. Like, I initially moved in with a friend of mine in Chicago, and then she kind of gave me an eviction notice, and there wasn't really anybody else I could move with. Yeah, I know, side-eye well earned. But like, I ended up like living with my parents for like another 8 months after that. And after a lot of futility and a lot of desperation and a lot of interviews that went absolutely fucking nowhere, I finally ended up getting a job, and from there I was kind of able to sort of like slowly rebuild. But I'd say the reconstruction process probably took like at least a couple of years.
As it does. I mean, again, it's kind of like life event, life event, life event, global
Mm.
event. Like, that's a huge drop. And I'm sure there are maybe some people out there who would be able to bounce back from that fairly quickly. But I don't think the average person, I think that's a slow crawl up for most folks.
Yeah, I'd agree. I became a Buddhist like when I was during the time that I spent in Minnesota. I think maybe 2018 was when I officially started identifying as such. Since I started embracing a Buddhist lifestyle, I've kind of become like a lot more cognizant of just the interconnectedness of things. When I look back on 2020, I just sort of realized it was basically just like, a 4-on-1 battle there where it was the world, it was the breakup, it was the job situation. It was kind of like a lot of people not really showing up at a time that I really kind of was hoping they
Need
would.
it.
Like if just one person during that entire time had said to me like, hey, this sucks and it's bad, but you've got this. You can figure this out. If just one person had said that to me, it would have made all the fucking difference in the world. And nobody did.
Would you have heard it if someone said it to you?
I think I would have, just because, I've kind of alluded to being kind of a dense idiot when I was younger, but I think I'm like a little more receptive to praise. And just kind of better at picking up on things like that. I mean, you could be right. It could be that somebody did try to communicate something similar, and I was just too miserable of a bastard back then to really notice it. But I don't know. I never really felt like I got that in even an indirect way.
Interesting. Interesting. My impulse is to say, I wish I'd have known that back then because I would have tried to, from my own COVID hell, been like, but Greg, it's, things will get better. How much I would have meant that, I'm, not 100% sure of given the time. But
Yes.
it's hindsight's 2020 as it always is. It's funny, like I had some rapid fire questions and you kind of just answered them. um,
Sweet. I do that.
but my general closeout on these, because I can't believe we've been talking for almost an hour already.
Shit.
Yeah, is I always leave a little room at the end for the guest to ask me a question. And being that we have 20 something years of history and this is our first face to face conversation, I am curious what immediate question you would have for me knowing all of our history.
Mm. Okay. I did try to come with a couple of questions prepared, and I am blanking on pretty much all but one of them now. So I'll start with the one that I've got locked and ready to go, and we'll take it from there.
Cool.
Since I'll be turning 40, within the next couple of weeks, a decade that you are kind of now on
I'm
your way out
exiting.
of.
Yes.
Yes. What are some, I guess, things you didn't know before entering your 40th decade that you kind of wish you'd known going in?
That is a good question. I think my season, I would say even my late 40s, is when I started to accept unpredictability. Like the whole, I don't know if I ever really had a life plan or at least as an adult, because things have always been kind of tenuous, but I don't know that I necessarily accepted the unpredictability of life until my 40s. Right before I turned 40, I moved back to New York. Um, there was the aforementioned global pandemic in the middle of my 40s. Dealing with health stuff, dealing with friend stuff, people getting married, people getting divorced, people dying, all this stuff. I think at a certain point, you have seen enough that, you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, this is my plan for the next day, the next month, the next year, whatever. I'm going to keep this plan pretty loose because I really have no idea what's going to happen in the next hour, never mind the next day, week, month, or year. The acceptance of unpredictability, I think, has been really like the most important lesson to learn. In addition to just like, again, I think this took me a long time, enjoying the moment, enjoying the moments,
Mm.
just kind of, and that also I think has something to do with unpredictability, just being like, hey, like this was a cool thing that happened. I'm going to sit back and be grateful for it and be accepting of, hopefully the next great thing to happen. And, it's still not like a consistent mindset for me. There are certainly periods when I'm like, fuck this. None of it is worth it. Like, burn it all to
Sure.
hell. And I think, this is really in like the last 2 or 3 years where it's like, okay, like enjoy these moments, because they are good moments, you know, when things are bad, it does help to have like a repository of good things to look at and be like, okay, it wasn't always like this and it's going to turn around.
It's funny you say that because I feel like a lot of my mid 30s were kind of like lost to COVID and kind of lost to the healing process after. But I also kind of learned a similar thing, just because I think the pandemic taught me just how quickly shit can fall apart,
Right.
especially kind of the way, my life went during most of 2020. So it kind of made me realize, well, appreciate the good shit while it's here and just kind of be willing to roll with the punches, even if some of those punches, are aiming below your belt and have barbed wire attached to the glove.
You never know when Mike Tyson's gonna swing a fist and like pop you right in the jaw.
Hmm.
But you have to accept it because what can you do to stop it? So I don't know. There's a weird metaphor, like a weird life lesson tied into that really bad metaphor somewhere, but we're just gonna let the listener try to figure out what we mean by all of that.
Sweet. Sounds good. I do have one more question that's kind of similar,
Okay.
because I know you've been doing like a lot of thinking and a lot of retrospective stuff. You've got your 50 for 50 podcast. I know you've been doing like a lot of blogging about just various things from your life. But what's something you're looking forward to and kind of moving on to this new decade in your life?
Oh, what's something I'm looking forward to? In the immediate, I'm looking forward to celebrating myself. I think this is the first birthday I've had where I've really been like, I'm gonna lean into the ego shit. I'm gonna be like, this is Mike week, month, year, whatever. Like I just want to really be intentional about doing the things I want to do, spending time with the people I want to spend time with, maybe spending a little money because I've always been kind of a tightwad in that respect and kind of held off on doing things because they're not financially prudent. And I don't think I'm not going to like go crazy and blow my entire life savings, but I do think, I'm going to treat myself a little bit. So that's in the immediate. I think in the long term, it's just, I am equal parts frightened and excited for what the future holds.
Oh, God, frightened and excited. That's 100%
Like,
where I'm at.
I'd say equal parts excited and terrified. And you can be good terrified and bad terrified. And I think I'm both of those things.
Yep. Feel you 100% on that one.
Yeah. But also, I'm like, you're a hip hop guy, right? Like I'm turning 50. Phife Dawg didn't make it to 50. Prince B didn't make it to 50. DMX barely made it to 50. Like the lifespan of a black man is shorter than every other gender, every other race there is. And, I remember a therapist who, was a white guy, but worked with like primarily Black and Latino clients. And he was like, man, y'all really go hard on your birthdays. And he's like, is it because, sort of the unpredictability of being a minority in this world or being lower income or whatever it is and not knowing how many more birthdays you're going to get? And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So it's, celebrate because you made it. Even if the
Yes.
circumstances around you aren't the greatest, you're still here.
Oh, shit. I get that 100%. I don't know. It's very rare that I get kind of like destroyed by a celebrity death anymore, but when D'Angelo passed last year, that was just like, oof. And I didn't even really think of myself as being like a diehard D'Angelo fan, but like I just kind of like after that just kind of like reconnected with his music, and I don't know, the loss just kind of like
Hit me hard too, man.
Yeah.
He's 2 years older than me. So it was crazy stuff. So, and that, folks, is how you record a podcast conversation with someone you consider a good friend that you've known for a really long time, but you've never had a verbal conversation with of any length. And I think that went pretty smoothly. And I'm super, super excited to have more conversations with Greg now that we have, after all this time, broken the voice-to-voice seal. And also super psyched to meet Greg in person. So that's going to happen, and it's pretty awesome. And thank you, Greg, for the many years of friendship. And thank you for the music that you've introduced me to over the years. And thank you for being my friend. I appreciate it. Thank you for being on the show as well. And we've certainly left the door open for further conversations. So let's maybe do this again. Thank you. And thank you for listening.